So this is Marty O'Donnell, everybody. And Marty is the composer of a lot of music that many of you are familiar with if you grew up playing video games. I did not, which makes me a better person than all of you. And there'll be a fair amount of that kind of thing. I'm really going to try to stifle in the interest of being a professional, but we've known each other a long time. And if I lapse into unprofessionalism, I apologize ahead of time. But Marty and I have known each other for a very long time.
Oh, yeah.
Since dinosaurs roamed the earth while the covered wagons were coming across the prairies. And so I thought it would be interesting for you, first of all, to hear his life journey, because it's an interesting one. So Marty, this will be a great opportunity for you to speak into these guys' lives, because they're about to embark on sort of a life journeys, many of them. So have at it.
So that's interesting because I was just having a talk with somebody that a couple of weeks ago, and it came out today on a podcast, and I double checked to see that it was all working. And one of the things he was asking me about was like how much planning did I had? Like, what was my goals as I was growing up or learning music or going through music school or the conservatory? And what was truthful that I said was like, I had no plan. And Tim knows this. Tim knows that I've had no plan. I always just went towards things that excited me and were interesting to me. So at one point, of course, I loved the piano. So I was a pianist and I learned all sorts of classical music. But of course, I also wanted to be a rock star. So then I was going to be a rock star. But I was able to somehow worm my way into the conservatory and be a piano major. But at the same time, I was still going to have a rock band and do progressive rock. Tim knows that well. He was in the band with me. And we fought for control of that band like cats and dogs, which was a blast. But I never considered composing, but I had a good enough ear that I could sort of figure out some complex prog rock or fusion song and pick out the parts and teach it to the other folks in the band. And one day with the drummer, if you remember Tim, Bill Priebe, said to me, "Why do you keep figuring out all these other people's songs? Why don't you just write something?" And believe it or not, in all of my years since the time I was like 6 taking piano lessons, no teacher ever said that I could try writing music myself. It just never was part of the picture. If you're a musician, you play other people's music and you figure out how to play it as well as you possibly can. So for someone just to say, "Why don't you try writing?" It was an amazing thing. I was probably 19 at the time. So I sort of went up the stairs and tried writing something and came up with something cool, brought it back down to the folks in the basement that were rehearsing. And, I forget who was there at the time. I know at least we had 2 guitar players and another keyboard player. Tim, believe it or not, played keyboard. You played bass, keyboards, we had a Hammond B3 organ and a Fender Rhodes, which was pretty cool. You played that, and you also played oboe, and I played flute at one point. Do you remember that? Anyway, it was a strange. Well, of course, it was progressive rock, so you could do anything. But anyway, I had some little tune that I had written that had some counterpoint in it, and I taught it to the guitarists, and the drummer played along with it. Whatever, it seemed cool. And at that moment, I got the bug to be a composer. So never had a plan to be a composer. By the time I started my junior year in college, I decided to switch from piano major to composition major. And of course, the dean of the conservatory took me aside and said, "You'll never make it. You'll never be able to get through all the credits you need to change to." And I said, "That's okay. I'm just here in college just to like see what I can learn. And I'm going to be a rock star anyway. So I don't need to get a degree." Which of course turns out to be kind of true. I never became a rock star, but the degree is not the important thing. That piece of paper is not as important as what you learn when you're getting your degree. What are the things you learn that you can take with you into the real world? even though I somehow still ended up getting the composition degree in the 4 years at the conservatory. And then after that, I decided I would keep going, and I went and got a master's at USC in composition, which was good. Again, I'm glad I did that, but I had no real plan. I didn't know what was going to come out of that. And one of the courses I took while I was at USC was a film composition class with a famous old irascible, pillar of the film composition industry, David Raxon, who had gone all the way back when he was young, when the first gig he had as a composer as a young man was with Charlie Chaplin for Modern Times. So that shows how old I am, that I actually took from somebody who worked with Charlie Chaplin. But what's interesting to me is at the graduate school at USC, they brought me in and said, you realize, of course, that your degree program, we won't count the credits from this film composition class because you're a composition major. It's an MM, Masters of Music. This film stuff is not going to count. And I'm like, okay, that's all right, because I don't really care about the degree anyway. Once again, I said that. So my point is that I think some of the most important things I did when I was in the years of my college and graduate work were some of the relationships I made, the bands I was in on the outside, some of the techniques courses that I took, so I could pick up a French horn and kind of understand how a French horn works. Although I can't play it, I can understand a little bit about it. Taking film composition with David Raxon and understanding what that is like. All those things sort of went into my background, which became really important once I got out of school. Stopped saying that if I get paid to write music for somebody that I would be prostituting my art, which is one of the first things I said. I learned very quickly, as soon as somebody offered me money, that I was actually pretty cheap. So then I started, as soon as somebody offered me money back in Chicago to write music for a little film and score a industrial, what they call an industrial film. As soon as I figured out I could do that and make a living actually writing music and producing music, I basically never looked back. But, fast forward another, 15, 20 years later, I got interested in what video games were offering in terms of the fidelity and how much you could expand and do long form music work for video games. So that was another thing I was not planning. I didn't know that was a business I could even get into. But I had some connections with the son of a friend, and once I started looking at what video games could offer, I jumped in with both feet and figured out how to work in that area. And the whole time, of course, the computer technology from the early 80s all the way up until now, I've been growing with all the digital, technology that allows you to create music. So that's a long time for the technology to mature. So if you jump in right now as an 18-year-old, there's a lot of learning to do. I was lucky enough to sort of just, age along with this technology. So everything new that was coming out in the technology was just the next week of something I had to get and understand. So although I could imagine teaching courses in electronic production and digital technology, I'm glad I never had to take a course in it. I just learned it because I grew up with it. And so here I am right now talking to my old friend, Tim.
So something you said en route there, I just wanted to jump on for a second. You said that it wasn't I want to talk about the education for a second.
Sure.
It wasn't about the degree. It was about the things that you took out of it and applied to the real world.
Yeah.
And so I think about, especially some of the younger students, who are freshmen and sophomores and stuff, and just getting going. in college life and those facing grad school and stuff, what should they look for? What are the kind of things they should be grabbing onto to take with them? What, just inform that kind of out of your own experience. What was it you took out and applied to the real world?
All right, well, let's just get the sort of the personal side out of the way. The relationships you make with other people your age in school actually are really important, because those friends end up becoming big shots at universities, or they end up having their own company. I'm not talking about you, Tim. You obviously are not a big shot.
I'm a failure.
There's a lot of other people I know I won't go into. But the personal relationships are really important. And then, of course, some of the teachers that you get to know, those are long lifetime relationships that are great. But so aside from the personal stuff, the actual learning for me, especially, like I was saying, I think some of the techniques courses, which might seem like, some of the most mundane things. I think I only got 1 credit for each one of those techniques courses. But I already played flute and piano and sang, but learning brass instruments, really important. Trying to play violin and viola and cello. I mean, it was eye-opening, and it was those courses really helped me understand not how to play well, but how to understand those instruments and some of the capabilities of the instruments. And then I hate to say it, but music theory is, at least in the composition world, that is a really important thing. But it shouldn't be that you're learning it because it's a bunch of rules. Theory should only be, it's almost like history of music. It's like, all music theory is simply a history of how educated musicians looked at the current practice of the time. It is not a set of rules to make you successful, or it's not a way of writing. If you want to write like Beethoven, you got to go back and look at what the music, the milieu, what was happening in his time theoretically. And then you might be able to have a little bit of an understanding of where he was coming from. Yeah, anyway, that's me. But, and the other, I just loved counterpoint and orchestration, but 16th century counterpoint, 18th century counterpoint, and then my orchestration classes in both undergraduate and graduate school were invaluable. I learned really, really practical things. So to the extent that you can take stuff away and apply it to the real world, practical real world applications, extremely important.
Just want to stop you for 1 second. I noticed the record button isn't on, Corey or Chris. Are we recording this interview?
Yes, it's being recorded.
Okay, great. So back to your life for a second, Marty. So you are back in Chicago after USC, and you mentioned that over time you wound up, kind of connecting to video games. What were you doing in the interim?
Well, I went from the first couple of, actually the very first thing that we got paid to do, even though the first thing that we were offered was to score a little Sears point of purchase industrial film. I think it was for jewelry or something. So it's like diamonds and watches, and there might have even been radial arm saws involved in some way. I can't remember, but so anyway, you kids don't even know what I'm talking about. You'd go into a Sears store and there would be kiosks with video, with TVs, and you'd walk up to the TV and it'd be playing a movie of something that you should buy. That's what we scored. So you can imagine how important music is to that particular marketing sales thing. But hey, they paid us, so that was good. But the thing that actually happened during that first little time we were working on something was one of the pieces that we did in this 5-song demo was immediately picked up by a different client, Marshall Fields, which is a big store in Chicago, used to be. And they had been apparently looking for some funky, weird, quirky piece of music that nobody else, they couldn't find any places. For some reason, one of the things that we had done just resonated with them. They immediately bought it. They paid for it on the spot. Within 2 days, it was on the air, on TV. I'm sitting at home watching the Bears football game. The commercial for Marshall Fields comes up. There's my music playing, no voiceover, no sound effects, just music and visuals. And I'm like, well, this is easy. I'm just going to do this for a living. This is fantastic. So, of course, as soon as I convinced my writing partner, Mike Salvatore, to quit his job and, let's go into business, as soon as we did that, the phone stopped ringing. I mean, suddenly I realized there was a lot more to the business than just getting lucky. You actually then had to work at it. What was your question again? Did I go off the track?
No. I like the zigzag of your life and
that's my life. So there you go.
The places that you landed. There's something. I'll just give you clues. There's something about felines and there's something about hamburgers.
Well, yes, we did many jobs for McDonald's. So anyway, what that meant is we led the thing that you could do in Chicago is score industrial films and do commercial jingles. So I became a jingle writer, which is more than just the sing-song jingles, but we did one. We are Flintstones kids, 10 million strong and growing, which I bet you every one of you guys are too young to know this, because although it still plays a little bit, there are places where it plays. Anyway, that jingle ended up being around for years. And then
And who recorded that jingle? Who recorded that jingle?
Well, the girl who sang "and growing" at the end, the one that they liked the most was her version, and we used that for probably 15 years. We just kept using the same "and growing" over and over again. That was my daughter, who at the time was 5 years old. So, and by the way, you should know this: those residuals help pay for her college. So, it can be worthwhile.
That's one thing, that all students today, high school kids and stuff, who come from families that are educated and have means, they're really down a lot on students wanting to go into music because they say there's no money in it. There's no money.
Right.
So talk to them a little bit about what, not like your personal income, but I mean about jingle singers and that kind of thing and what the potential is there.
This is a difficult thing, and I'll tell you why. It's because as a creative person, I don't see very many people, but you should all raise your hand if you've ever heard at any point in your life some adult look at you and say, you can't make a living doing that. Anybody have hands? Okay. I was lucky. My mom and dad, who were both creative people, thank God, never said that to me. So I never heard those words, which is a blessing because I never was discouraged from doing anything creative. But it is hard to make a living in music. It just is. It's just like, but if you are a good musician, if you have the bug, it's not like you have a whole lot of choice. It's going to be a part of your life, whether you make a living at it, whether you make a great living at it, or whether it's a hobby. It should be an essential part of your life because that's who you are as a person. So figuring out how to make a living at it, that sometimes takes a little extra, willpower and flexibility. You have to go, if you want to make a living at being a musician, you got to go where the money is. And so for me in Chicago, the money was, as a composer, was scoring films, was doing jingles, was singing on commercials because singers are part of the Screen Actors Guild and they get residuals. So I sang a lot of Mr. Clean, which was great because I got paid for that. So anyway, I don't know what, I don't want to discourage anybody, but what I would say is if you feel like I'm the best oboe player in the world, and I'm just going to learn how to play my oboe better than anybody else, that's great. But don't expect to make a living just because you're a great oboist. Sorry. you got to fight to get into an orchestra, and then you're going to have issues with whatever orchestra you're trying to be in, and there's going to be other things that happen. You have to make sure you get paid well because you're recording something. You got to make sure that you're not getting ripped off if you're doing a live concert. You got to, if you're going to like teach, you got to make sure you figure out how to get paid for teaching lessons. At some point, money becomes a thing, and you can't just be above it all and just expect, I deserve to make a living. Somebody should just be giving me money just because I'm a great oboist. And I pick on the oboe players because I love oboe players, but it's just the one I like to say. Maybe because Tim was an oboist at some point.
A lot of them don't even know that. So because you just let one out of the bag, and so I have a few too. But I'm going to keep it on the rails. So
Okay.
the commercials for Flintstone Kids and McDonald's and kitty litter. You can't forget.
Well, the kitty litter, yeah, you were hinting at that. Yeah, the cat litter one, which was kitty litter, Tidy Cat. That's what it was called, Tidy Cat. Yeah, that was after several years of doing commercials, and I found myself late at night sort of arguing about whether the, woodwind part should go up or down at some point in the commercial with a claymation cat. And I kind of realized I'd hit a wall. It was no longer that first initial excitement of seeing my music on TV during the Bears game, that had worn off. And now I realized I had spent years doing commercial music, and I'm doing an underscore for a kitty litter commercial. And so always listen to that little voice inside your head that says, you need to make a change. I didn't have to change from being a composer. I just had to see if there was something else I could compose music for that would be more satisfying. And very shortly after that, video game music came along, and that was a great outlet.
And the video game connection was a connection to our state. You want to tell them a little bit about that?
Our state. Oh yeah. You're the state we're in. Yes, I see what you're saying.
Well, you're not your current state. Your current state is pretty desperate. But anyway.
No, I was still living in Chicago, but I had a friend there named Dick Staub who had a radio program, and he said that his son, who was 18 at the time, was interested in, believe it or not, he was going to start going to the University of Washington. He was accepted, but he was visiting his father in Chicago and wanted to see my studio because he was interested in music. So I had him come downtown. He saw the studio, and then he saw that I had video games, computer games up on my shelf. And he said, "Oh, I have friends who make computer games and I'm working with them this summer as an intern." And I said, "Oh, that's interesting. What games are they?" And he mentioned a couple of games I'd never heard of. And he said, "Yeah, they got this little studio that they make video games at, and they're in Spokane, Washington." And, I'm in Chicago. That's a big city, New York, Chicago, LA. I didn't even know where Seattle was, but Spokane wasn't even on my radar at all. And I couldn't imagine anything coming out of Spokane that would have been interesting.
Yeah, that's for Michael Gagliotti, Jason Kissinger, and a couple other guys that are watching. And my wife, I should add my wife, which is great.
Look, I know I was being a jerk, but that was all an internal process I had in my head. But I said, well, he said, I have a beta version of a game this team is working on in Spokane, and I'd love to show it to you. So I said, sure, come on over to my house. He did. He booted it up, and it was Myst. And so I'm playing a beta version of Myst in the summer of 1993, and it was like my whole world changed. As soon as I heard and saw what they were doing in that game, I was like, if I don't jump into that industry, the train will just pass me by. I will lose out. I knew immediately that this is the kind of thing that I wanted to create for. I wanted to have that kind of creative outlet. So I I made it my goal at that point to meet Josh's friends. It's funny. He within a few weeks after that, he called me and said, "Hey, I'm about to start at the University of Washington, but my friends Robin and Rand Miller from Spokane want me to continue working with them." And I said, "Well, what do they want you to do?" And he says, "They want me to be the art director for the sequel to Myst." And I said, "Yeah, don't go to school, go work for them." Yeah. Oh, I didn't say that right away. I think my first question was, what is your intended major? What do you want to study when you're at university? And he said, "I want to study computer graphics." And I said, "Well, don't go to school for that. If you have an opportunity to work for the leading cutting edge video game, computer game company, you will be teaching this course at some point in your life if this is successful. If it's not successful and 2 years goes by and it all falls apart, then you go to school, you're a freshman and you're 20. Trust me, by the time you're 25, nobody cares when you got your degree, how old you were. I mean, just nobody cares. By the time you're 30, nobody cares whether you even have a degree or not." Sorry, Tim, I shouldn't say that. It depends on what industry you go into. Now, obviously, if you go into academics, it probably makes a difference. But so he took my advice. Of course, his father called me the next day and was like, "What did you just tell my son?" And so Dick and I talked about it, but Dick wasn't all that mad. Basically, his wife was mad at me. And I think to this day, she's still mad. But Josh has turned into, he works at Disney. He worked in the game industry for 20 years, and then he went off and he's been doing Disney stuff, Pixar and Disney. He's won the Academy Award for animation and lighting, and he's had an amazing career. And it's true. He never did go back and get his degree in, 3D computer graphic art. He didn't, he's teaching those courses now. So I was right about that. And at one point I told him, I said, "I'm telling people that I'm responsible for your career." And he says, "No, I'm responsible for your career." And he's right. It's like if it wasn't for him, I would not have met Robin and Rand Miller. I wouldn't have done Riven, which was the sequel to Myst. And then I wouldn't have gotten into Bungie to do Myth: The Fallen Lords and Halo and all that stuff. So and once again, there you go. It's your personal connections sometimes that you are probably the most important things in your life.
So Bill Gates or Microsoft at some point became interested in what you do.
Yeah.
And they brought you out here, right?
Yeah. So Bungie, I started working with Bungie. We did a couple of games called Myth: The Fallen Lords and Myth 2, Soul Blighter. And then we started working on a new project that was called Halo. And in 1999, we were at Macworld, New York, and we showed what we were working on. And Bill Gates came, and not Bill Gates, Steve Jobs came, and at the Steve Jobs Macworld, New York, showed Halo to the world for the first time. And that was the time I written a piece that had the monks chant singing and the orchestra playing. And it was, once again, I got lucky. It was just music and the visuals of the game. There was no sound effects. Even though I was the sound guy, I was the sound designer. The engine we had ready at the time, the computer engine, didn't support sound and music. So I just wrote a piece of music that would go along with this demo. And somebody had to hit play on a CD player while the other guy hit the play button for the scripted real-time game demo. And then we just crossed our fingers and hope everything sort of sunk up. And it did, and it became the next big thing. And by 2000, by a year later, Microsoft had been making plans to develop the Xbox, which was the new console that had all the power of a PC. And they did this directly to fight Sony and the PlayStation. And so they had to look very quickly to find products that they could, and studios that they could just buy outright and buy that IP. And so they bought Bungie and Halo, brought us all out to Redmond, Washington, and said, you're going to be a launch title of whatever you need, start working. And it was, even during that year, it was fun. I got to meet Bill Gates. Bill Gates came over to the campus where we were working and where our studios were, and he came in and watched. He actually came into my recording studio that I had just finished building inside that studio, and wanted to see how the music was made. And so we had a good time. I mean, it was once again, it was certainly nothing I had planned, but if you sort of just keep following the instincts and where your nose leads you and what's interesting, you end up meeting Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. So that was fun.
Wow. So I want to be able to do three things over the next few minutes. One is to kind of talk about your process as a composer. The second is to talk about how that interfaces, obviously, in the video game world, where there are multiple levels of things that can happen at any minute given the player's actions, and how all that works. And then we want to allow some time for these guys who, as you know, because you've seen the materials, are going to be composing sort of an online piece together, and
Right.
started recording and all that sort of thing. So, they're great sports, these folks you're talking to today, and they've are doing this thing, and a lot of them have to be somewhat petrified as to know how to get off square one. Just how do I do something? Their first little assignment is just to do a 15 seconds over an A-flat kind of drone. And then they're going to send those stems, and then we're going to layer it up and all that sort of thing. So
You're moving.
I know I'm moving because my family just walked in the door. So, and you know them. Anyway, so what would you say to these guys who are looking to get off, to get going? How do you get inspired? What kind of parameters do you look for? What works for you?
Yeah. There's so many different ways to approach this kind of thing. But what I would say is, as a musician, you put on many different hats. Sometimes you're the performer of somebody else's music, and so you're working really hard to try to understand the music and get your technique up and learn the piece, and you've got the performance hat on. Sometimes you're taking classes, so you're thinking about music history and you're analyzing, so you're doing counterpoint analysis and orchestration and everything else. When it comes time to compose, and I wish this had been more a central part of my music education, and that is two things that I think are missing in standard music education from the time you're a child all the way through getting your PhD. And that is improvisation and composition. And those are kind of like two sides of the same coin, in my opinion. If you think about early music, 16th century counterpoint, if you think about 16th century music ensembles, if you think about 18th century, the continuo, what did the continuo play? There was a bass line and a chord chart. It was the 18th century version of bass line and chord chart, but that's what figured bass is. It's just a bass line with a chord chart. And if anybody has ever played off a chart, there's nothing there. It's just chord symbols. So as a keyboard player, for example, you have to understand what the common practices of pop music, let's say. And then you have to be able to take that chord chart and improvise a part based on that stuff. These are things that should not be looked down upon. They are essential parts of what it means, in my opinion, to be a whole rounded musician. As a musician, you should be able to improvise. As a musician, you should be able to read a chord chart and make something cool. As a composer, you should be able to sit down and look at a blank piece of music paper and figure out a way to start making something from nothing. You can never start completely from a blank. So what I would say is when it comes time to compose, if you've never composed before, come at it from an improvisatory place. Just start playing like you're in a playground. Don't think about theory. Don't think about parallel fifths. Don't think about anything. Believe it or not, now I'm going to go against, especially probably everybody in the composition department at the University of Washington, but it is a feeling. If you can't tap in to the emotional side of music and the emotions inside your own body and bring out musically, improvisatorily, you're going to struggle. And I know that a lot of you probably haven't had that encouragement to do that in your life. For those of you who have, if you went to let's say a church where there was, gospel music and you could improvise, or if you've been in a jazz band where improvisation is important, you know how to tap into those muscles, musical muscles. If all you've ever had is formal training in how to play technically correct music, then there's a part of your learning that has been suppressed, and you got to get away from that. So here you have this opportunity just to hear an A flat drone and then make something up. So first thing I would do is respond to it emotionally, start playing something over the top of that loop and see what affects you. So you have to be, so when I start composing, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll wait until, especially at the piano, I'll wait until my fingers or my improvisatory actions do something that cause me to have like a little chill up the back of my spine. So it's something I just did, but there's another part of me that goes, oh, that was nice. I like the way that felt. So you hang on to that because it's all about the emotions. I'm sorry. Don't let anybody tell you that music and emotions aren't like locked together. Because you all, at some point, especially when you were younger, you loved some performance or some record or some music or something because of how it affected you emotionally. Then the longer you get trained, the more that sort of gets beaten out of you. And somehow it's as though you're not supposed to think that music and emotions are tied together. That's just crazy. That's like becoming a chef, but never tasting your food because somehow it's not important the flavor's not important anymore. Like, how is that even possible? And by the way, the rest of the world, the untrained world, would think you're insane if you said to them music and emotions are not tied together. The rest of the world says, well, yeah, I don't know who you are, but I'm not going to pay attention to you at all, because of course it is. Of course it is.
So I was talking to Chris earlier on, and we were talking about things to talk to you about. And one of the things that came up was this notion of how you have to branch off into other, and I remember visiting you in Bungie, and you were showing me the levels of the game. If a player does a certain thing, you have to write a different thing. And so the music sort of coexists in unheard layers all the time. What is that like, just technically speaking? What happens there?
Well, this is where, digital technology has really opened up what you can do musically. It's the implementation of music into an interactive space. So interactive and adaptive. I like to call it adaptive music. It's music that I know will adapt to something external. So the player's inputs, the game player's inputs will change what the music is going to do. And if you think about it, it's really not that different in the most fundamental way. If anybody's ever played at somebody's wedding, or at a church or any sort of formal place where you're playing a piece that has a first ending and a second ending and a bridge or whatever it might be. It has a coda but it's like, yeah, don't go to the coda until the bride shows up in the back, right? So you sometimes you vamp, sometimes you just, we're going to play that again because the guy who's first chair violin is saying, no, we got to go through it again, puts a little signal up. So there are times when you can play legitimate classical music, but the music itself was already designed to somehow adapt and become longer or maybe shorter, depending on what was happening in the room. So really all that is, it's just sort of on a more granular level in video games, using stems, using different sections, using software that we can design that can control the playback so that we can seamlessly transition into higher or lower intensities, different areas of music that change the emotional feel, where something starts, where something changes again, where something loops for a while with some variations on it, and then where the coda comes in, and now we go to the ending. So we can have a piece of music that can score the emotional journey of the player, whether the emotional journey is 2 minutes long or 6 minutes long, let's say, something like that. So that's a big difference. So that it's not like the music itself has to be drastically different. It could be any kind of style of music. It just, you have to think about taking that piece and making it adapt to an interactivity. So somebody else's input could change the way the music plays back. My aesthetic on adaptive music is that I don't want the player to realize that I'm doing this behind the scenes. I want them to play their 6-minute thing. And when they get to the end, they can go, wow, that was really emotionally powerful. I can't believe it feels like the music scored everything I did. But I don't want them to be aware that, oh, every time I go up the stairs, the pizzicato strings takes me up the stairs. Every time I go down the stairs, it goes blup, 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 blup. Because that becomes a music game. And there are music games. I mean, there are games that are music games, and that's fine. But when you're trying to, what I like to do is score music for games where the job of the music is to enhance the player's emotional story, the player's emotional journey through the game. And I don't want them to be aware of all the manipulative things that I'm doing.
So they show you video and you write to it. Has there ever been a time where you've come up with stuff and you've written it and they've adapted the video because what you wrote is powerful, or do you just truncate or elongate or whatever?
Well, you're showing your age, Tim. This isn't about video.
Right.
Video is linear. Scoring to movies, scoring video is, on one hand, a much easier thing because I know precisely where something begins, and then they kiss at 1 minute, 20 seconds, 15 frames, and then they blow up at 2 minutes, 10 seconds. And that happens every time because it's video. So to be adaptive, actually what I need then is the engine itself, the game engine. So I have to be able to play the game itself, and I have to work with the designers and the level designers on that game. And I have to be inside that engine that is in control of all of those elements, and I can see how they all go together. So for me, it's like I don't want to have somebody capture a video of a game and then I try to come up with something appropriate and then let them let the designers or the programmers figure it out. I want to be right inside with everybody else with the game engine. And so I do have to depend on there are tools out there now that are better than they used to be. We used to have to design our own adaptive audio engine, and we did that for years and years and years. Now there are third-party companies that make tools, and one is called Wwise, W-W-I-S-E. Another one's called Fmod. And I'm sure somebody how many people are here? Let me see, 64, wow. Okay, so somebody in the 64 probably knows about Unity or Unreal or Wwise or Fmod. I hope somebody in this group knows about those things, because these are all, believe it or not, they're actually, you can download these programs for free and just start playing around with them. And they are high-end software for making games, for making interactive music. like I think every person who's a music major at a school should probably take a 1-semester course in Wise, which is a software, because of the things you can do with Wise, the way it just teaches you how malleable music is and how you can adapt all sorts of cool stuff to do amazing different things. And it takes it out of the stuffy, I must play this sonata exactly the way it's written, and it just frees everything up. I could take a Beethoven sonata and make it adaptive to a game, and it would be cool. Somebody, as a matter of fact, just did that. One of the games of the year last year, somebody amongst your 64 has played the game, the Untitled Goose Game. Anybody heard of this? Somebody? I don't see enough people. And the whole thing is adaptive music. It's Debussy. Somebody took some Debussy piano music and just adapted the music throughout this whole thing. It's absolutely hilarious and a blast and fun. Now, granted, Debussy might turn over in his grave, but it's done so well. You would just love it, and I would teach it at every school I'd ever be at, and then I get fired.
Of course. I remember visiting you at Bungie some years ago, and you played a thing that you had written for me, just in your studio, and I said to you something like, "Good grief, Marty! How many bass players is that? Is that 40 bass players?" And then the other day when we were talking, you said to me, if somebody thinks that they're in the studio, if they're just going to play their oboe sound, and that's
I said oboe again.
Yeah, like there isn't such a thing as like a natural. Can you talk to him about that a little bit, about the real world and what's going on?
Well, I mean, this is really interesting to me right now, seeing this. A couple of, I think it's almost 2 years ago, but for one of the games that I just finished recently called Golem, I decided to do a choral piece. And I thought, it'd be fun to get the fan community involved in this choir piece that I just wrote. I'll just do a rough track of it and use it as a click track and send the file of the choral piece to anybody who wants to participate. And I gave them the music and the track, and had it was basically as a click track so that they could listen to the music in their head and then sing one of the parts. They could sing the tenor, alto, soprano, bass. I actually had one guy who sang all the parts, which was great. I used everything. And so I got back all these individual files and I put them together in Pro Tools, which is a music software program, and edited it together and mixed it and made a nice stereo version of it, and choir and reverb and the whole thing. So the technology has been there for a while. And by the way, I'm not the first person to do this. There's a guy who's doing choral music like this all the time. He actually does a video of himself conducting, and then the people in the community just sing to what he's doing, and then he puts it all together. So, but of course, now that we're all like this, we're all on Zoom and we're all social media, and we can't see each other in person, which will change. We'll get back together again soon, but this actually shows how powerful some of this software is. And what I would say is the quality of your recordings still matter. So if, for example, you are a flute player, an oboe player, and you think, oh, I bet you I could play flute for somebody and get paid by sitting in front of my computer and playing a flute part and sending it to them, you're only half right, because you might be a great flute player, but your recording might be just not up to snuff. It could be because you're in a room where somebody like me, I can hear the room echoing, and I don't want that. Or I can hear that you're using the internal microphone on your PC or your Mac, and it's not good enough. So I would, if I was in a music program at a college, I would also be teaching just fundamental principles behind recording, because any player, any really good player, becomes twice as valuable if they can also record themselves. If they can have a decent mic and some decent software, and they can make a recording themselves that is usable for me, they're not just a good flute player, they're a good flute player who gives me a good recording. And if between the two, I'm going to take the one with a good recording every time. And that's going to be, that was not important, Tim, as you know, when we were in college, because we went to a recording studio and had a horrible time. But it's important. It's more and more important now. And if you watch some of these cool viral videos that show some guy playing cello or bass, and then a flute player comes in, and a clarinet comes in, and a French horn comes in, and suddenly they're doing Beethoven's, Ode to Joy. Well, those players didn't know how to make it into Ode to Joy. There was some producer behind the scenes that knew that eventually they were going to fold all of those individual stems, those individual recordings, put them together and mix them, put the right kind of reverb and EQ on them, and then slowly morph that into an existing recording. Maybe by that symphony has already recorded the Ode to Joy, and then it ends up that way. Super, super powerful piece of magic from the internet. But the person who really made that wasn't so much the players as much as also that producer who knew the software. So if you're a good player, also learn how to use the tools that are out there. And the tools are there now today. The tools are there now today. It's never been easier or cheaper to make a good, decent recording of yourself. So you should figure that out.
Well, that's cool because it's kind of lending validity to this thing we're trying to do here, which is neat. I want to give the students a chance to weigh in here. So do we have any questions?
Yeah. So again, what we'll do is I'll call on your name and I'll give you the opportunity to ask your question directly. Zach Matthews, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Sure. It doesn't have a whole lot to do with what we're talking about right now in terms of what we're doing in this class, but just your personal life. I was just wondering what it was like to work with Paul McCartney, and how like what kind of ideas did he bring to the table that were different than what you were doing? Like, how did that change video game music, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, number one, just for those who don't know, Paul McCartney was a rock star. He used to be in a band called Wings, and before that he was in another band. I can't remember the name of it.
Something about bugs. I heard there bugs. Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, so for guys for people in the boomer generation, like, I'd rather have an audience with Paul McCartney than with the Pope. I hate to say that, but it's true. As a musician, Paul McCartney the fact that I got to work with him was ridiculous. It was over the top. It was amazing. So the 2 years I worked with Paul was great. I loved it. I don't necessarily think it changed video game music, as a thing, but it certainly helped the rest of the world realize that maybe video game music is something that you could take seriously in some way. He just is a really interesting musician. He's self-taught. He is proud that he doesn't read music, which is always sort of funny to me because I always think, I always sort of believe that Paul would be even better, as good as he is, if he also could read music. But that's just me. But working with Paul was great because he's a guy who's totally going to be working entirely from instinct and from his gut. And it's really good to be continually reminded of how powerful that can be and how important that is. When I first had a meeting with him, I came back to the studio and I told the powers that be there that I had two things I need to accomplish. One was that Paul would trust me. And number two, that I had to believe that what we did together would be better than if I was just not working, if he wasn't part of it. And they of course, they were just like, well, how long is that going to take? So, which is not a helpful question at all. You never know how long something's going to take. But when we finally got to the point where Paul was excited about something that I had been working on, and when I clarified with him that I wanted, that I would love to actually collaborate rather than just take some of his material, some of his melodies, and make something that would be workable in the game. But I wanted to incorporate stuff that he had done along with some of my stuff. And he clarified. He said, "Oh no, that'd be great. Take some of my music and put it with your music, and it'll become our music." And I'm like, "Yes, that's what I was waiting for." He trusts me, and I think this is going to be, what we make together would be better than, it'll be, greater than the sum of its parts. So that might not be a super specific answer, but like it was a wonderful experience, and it changed my approach to collaborating on music. So thanks for the question. That was fun.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next up, Chase, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Awesome. So first off,
Oh, look at that.
yeah.
I
really
like your
cool.
poster.
Thanks. I actually just found out I live like 10 minutes away from Cyan Inc. I just found out before this, I live down the street from like the headquarters. So that was pretty cool.
It is cool.
My question for you is, what are some of the biggest mistakes that either you or like you've seen other people make when scoring for film, game, or TV?
Yeah, there are several mistakes that you can make. I think one of the biggest ones is thinking that you need to have music all the time. When you're scoring a film, the story is most important. When you're scoring a game, the game is the most important thing. The music in those cases, music needs to serve a subservient role. It has to enhance and extend, what's happening in the movie or the game, which means if a lot of times what I hear in games is people have overscored it. They've used too much music, which means it starts to lose its impact. Music plays too much. It's always there. People, if you give them too much music, somebody's going to like turn the music down. And then when the music needs to make an important emotional statement, it doesn't have any power left. So that would be number one, is the importance of what I would call silence. And of course, nothing is ever really silent. There's always, especially as an audio director, I'm thinking about the entire audio canvas, which includes ambient sound, sound effects, voiceover, everything that has to do with sound. And then the music is also part of that thing. Sometimes music can carry everything. Sometimes just an ambient sound design can carry for quite a while. So it's always a balance of those things. And sometimes the other thing I would say is to a mistake that's made a lot of times by people who just haven't really paid attention to how music works in entertainment, is that you don't always want to do the obvious thing. And the best example of this is John Williams in Jaws. He did a great theme for the shark. It's like everybody knew that represented the shark. You didn't see the shark, but you knew the shark was there because the music is telling you it's there. So he set up these expectations of like shark equals da-da, da-da, da-da. That's the shark. And then at a very significant point in the movie, when Roy Scheider is throwing chum off the back of the boat, the shark comes up out of the water and, of course, scares the crap out of everybody, including Roy, the actor. And if you watch that scene, when the shark comes out and the shark is coming and comes up, there's no music. The music starts after the shark goes back down. So all of a sudden, you were set up as the audience to have these expectations that shark music is going to happen when there's a shark. And instead, he did just the opposite. So the mistake would have been to have shark music playing before the shark came out. That would have been a mistake. But John was like a brilliant, and he's always been a brilliant composer for movies. So watch movies as a musician, as a composer, arranger, whatever. You should look at video games and movies, and just think about what technically is being done to enhance your experience as the audience. And don't just turn your mind off. Now that you're a musician and you've got training, you can analyze everything that's going on. It means your appreciation is going to change a little bit, but you can see what you think works and what doesn't work.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. I like your poster. Tim, that's a halo. He's sitting in front of a halo, just in case you didn't know.
What's is it
it's
you
an-
mean like the Virgin Mary?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
exactly.
It's installment 04 of the Halo.
Oh, it's 04. Okay, got it. They call it Halo. Okay.
Stacy, if you want to ask your question.
Okay. Oh, there I am. Okay.
Hi, Stacy.
Hi. Greetings from an oboe player, by the way.
Oh, good.
Um,
I love oboe.
what I was wondering is how actually kind of work with the video game teams. I mean, are you getting together in person, online, discussing what you're looking for, or are you just kind of allowed free reign? How does that whole, how does it work interacting with the teams and the people that have to then incorporate it into the game?
Well, I think I got the gist of your question. So collaboration is a huge part of anything outside of just being a soloist, right? So you have to figure out how to collaborate. In the video game industry, you could be a freelancer, which means you have your own little studio, you get jobs that people want you to do stuff, and then you try to figure out what they want as good as possible, and you make stuff and you give it to them, and then you're sort of done, and you just hope they do the best they can with it. I've never really liked working that way, which is why when I went inside Bungie and the team I'm on now, which is my own company, Highwire, I work directly with the people who are making the game. So I'm working with designers, with creative directors, with art directors, programmers. So I work directly with all these people so that we're making collaborative decisions about a lot of things. And as audio director, and this is an important thing, if you can be sort of in charge of the audio inside of a team, then it's your call. How the final audio works is your call. So a creative director might come to me and say, and this is the way I like it the best. If somebody who's creative, who I'm collaborating with, says, yeah, I heard what you did, I played through that thing, and the music made me feel kind of goofy, and I was expecting to feel scared and intense. That is a wonderful thing to hear back from somebody, because then I know, okay, I didn't want him to feel goofy. I think I should change this because he's given me just his emotional response, and he has an emotional expectation that I didn't meet. So I could just say, no, you're wrong. Your emotions are wrong. I know what's right. I'm going to do it my way, which sometimes I do. But most of the time I listen to that, especially if they're giving me those kind of emotional notes. And then I try to work that and try to figure out what it is that they didn't think worked, and then fix it. So it's an iterative process. It's collaborative. As soon as somebody comes to me and says, I think this line you did here in the music should be a flugelhorn and not a baritone. And then at that point, I just say, oh yeah, you know what? You write it. Goodbye. Because it's like if they have that much expertise, I'm not going to help them at all. So I really don't want people to say, yes, here's this Led Zeppelin song that you should sound just like this, or here's a Holst piece, I want you to sound just like Holst. I'm sort of like, yeah, you know what, you need to hire somebody else to do that. I just don't want to work that way. So I've been lucky enough to be able to be a sort of a prima donna about things and say, goodbye, I'm not working for you. Although I've never really had to do that, except a couple of times. But the thing you want to get is a team where they are telling you their legitimate emotional response to your music. And then you can tell whether you're successful or not because of that. That's how it works.
Yeah, I think that's useful, Marty, for the project that we're in because they are arranged in actual teams and it's competition thing. So that's really great. I was gonna, well, let's keep asking questions. Corey, go. Any more?
Yeah, we have a few more. Feel free to cut me off if we need to.
Wait a second. Did Griffin ask a question?
He just posted one.
Good. He's next because Marty's got to see this.
Okay, Griffin and Katie, if you want to ask your question.
So I'm assuming that this picture is of you two, which is a good news.
What in the world is that? Yes, that is me and Tim. Wow.
Great. So she was right. So you mentioned earlier that.
By the
you
way,
can-
I'm the good-looking one. He's the weird, geeky.
Okay. Yeah, we figured.
You look like a drug addict.
You mentioned earlier about using video game software to create interactive music, and I'm familiar with a few games that kind of do that, but it seems like that's a really difficult thing to do as one person. How do you recommend starting? You listed a number of softwares, but do they have built-in music programs? Do you need external software? And how much do you think that you would need to know about like graphic design?
Okay, at the most fundamental level, you need to know nothing about graphic design. So you don't have to get Unity or Unreal. Those are two game design programs. If you're interested in making a game, go ahead and try that. But if you get, what I would recommend is getting Wwise, W-W-I-S-E. You can download that for free as a student. You can use it unlimited. They have online tutorials. The thing that they sort of assume that you understand is that you understand how to create audio files, that you know how to make a WAV file, that you know how to like potentially, if you have a sequencer and you have some MIDI instruments, you know how to put that together and make a mix of something. The Wwise is assuming you have a certain amount of knowledge with making musical or audio files. So once you have that, then you can jump into Wwise for free. And I would recommend learning Wwise. Like I said, if I was at a university, I would have a semester on just working with Wwise for everybody. And I mean that. I mean everybody who's a musician should learn something like that. It is the future. The future. You can tell I was interested in that. Look at me in that picture behind you. I was ready to go.
Yeah, we both were. So Corey, more questions.
Yes, Oliver, if you want to go ahead and go next.
Sure. So I've played a few of the Halo games, and I was wondering if you approached composing music for them differently, because the main Halo arc focuses around one character, Master Chief, whereas the other ones revolve around a team. So did you think about giving different people on the team their different themes?
Well, that's a great question. There's different ways you can approach doing projects like this. And some people sort of like the Peter and the Wolf idea, where you look at who the characters are and you decide to write themes or leitmotifs for each character or location or weapon or whatever it might be. I tend to, and that's not to say that that's a wrong way of doing it or there's a right way. I tend to just really focus on what the emotional journey of the player is going to be and what the overarching story is, which means there are going to be moments of different emotions. So there's going to be the poignant moments and the heroic moments and the battle moments and the sad moments and the scary moments and the creepy moments and all that stuff. And sometimes they're so those journeys are connected. You start off poignant and you end up scared, and you at the end you're heroic, whatever it is. So I like to write music that can enhance all of those emotions And then what happens is I start finding out after a while that like, oh, I keep coming back to this one theme every time Master Chief is doing a certain thing. And it sort of evolves into the Master Chief theme, or this is the Cortana theme, or this is the theme that represents the ODST team, or whatever it might be. Or this is the theme that kind of represents the city that's got rain at night. I don't, and it might be interesting to approach it from a standpoint of making that musical vocabulary for each one of these things. But I tend to let the music itself, as I'm working with the games and the story, I let it sort of evolve into those things, and then I use it that way. So once again, I'm more reactive than I am planning. I'm not a good planner. That doesn't mean that people who plan well. I mean, if you look at a composer like Ravel was like a maniac when it came to planning. Like he scored his music paper, and put time signatures and scored it all out with just bar lines before he started actually writing music. He's insane. I would not even have a clue how to do that. But it's a legitimate way of approaching it. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I like your hat. It's hopeful.
You know, they said to bring a meme to class, so I did.
Oh, is that what this is? Oh, got it.
You're a meme.
Oh, you're memes. Yeah. Excellent.
Adam, if you want to ask your questions.
Yeah, sure. Hello. First, I just wanted to say thank you very much for doing this for us. I also played.
Well, there's that band behind you. I know those
Hey,
guys.
yeah, those guys. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, thanks again. I played Halo, and it made a big influence on me, and it's cool to be able to
Great.
you today. My question, you were talking earlier about how valuable it is for instrumentalists to be able to have the ability to record themselves and produce a recording. And I think we're all on the same page in terms of not having a whole lot of experience with musical hardware and software. So my question was, I was wondering if you could recommend a certain microphone for someone. I'm a saxophone player. I was curious about woodwind, but I don't know if there's different mics that would be better for certain instruments, but I'm curious if you could recommend a mic in a certain price range that would do what you would expect an instrumentalist to need to do, and then software that you'd recommend to plug it into to, reverb effects. What would that package look like? And I was wondering if you could recommend that.
Well, I mean, obviously there's a price point for every place you want to get into. Listen, things like, if you have a computer, you already have an amazingly powerful recording device. I mean, you can get some sort of little USB adapter that will take a mic input that's probably better than the built-in mic. Your built-in mic is probably just not good enough to really start with. And then the reason is it just can't handle the dynamic range of an instrument. Although, a saxophone has no dynamic range, so that's okay. It's just loud. I kid, come on. I love saxophone, as you know. If you played ODST, I love saxophone. Sony, AKG, these are places you can find microphones. You're probably going to have to spend, 150, 200, you're going to have to spend a little money to get a microphone that will give you the right kind of power to sort of do some mic compression. Compression being that it doesn't get blown out by sounds that are too loud easily, and if it's recording soft sounds, the noise floor doesn't go too far up. And then you want to record into a program. I'm pretty sure things like Audacity are pretty accessible. You can work your way up. I think you can get a sort of like a student version of Pro Tools, I believe. And there are sequence programs like Reason. Reason's a good program too. Oh my gosh, there's a Mac program. I can't remember it all of a sudden. anyway, just learning those things, it doesn't really, I would say the other thing besides having a decent microphone and a decent interface that helps you get into a program is where you record. Like every room has hard walls that are square to each other, which means you're gonna get what's called a standing wave. You get that little pingy sound, and hearing the sound of the room is always a problem. So sometimes around the mic you can get a baffly thing that helps just eliminate some of that stuff. You want to be in a quiet room that doesn't have a lot of echo in it. And that what it used to be back in the early days, you had to spend tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars to make a room soundproof and all this stuff. And I remember early on we kept working on making our studio better and better, and then we started hearing that there were composers and producers in New York City that were doing national commercials and all sorts of stuff, and they were doing it in their apartment. And they would have the window open while they were recording something. And I'm like, what? So you can go down that road and just keep trying to eliminate, all noise and have it, 100% soundproof room. And you still might write and perform horribly. So that's not going to help. If you have talent and it's good performance and you're writing something that's worth listening to, you just want to give it the best possible shot. So no low noise floor, no echo, and good dynamic range. So you can get that with just go to, just look up online. You can find all sorts of setups, and it might cost you $400 or $500 by the time you're done. But I bet you spent more than that on your iPhone anyway. So it's your life, man. It's your career.
Awesome, thank you.
All right. And you know what? But just as an aside, I'm just so happy that the Beatles continue to have fans to this day. That's just amazing, isn't it, Tim? Come on.
Yes, it is. He's almost 80, isn't he? How old is he?
He's 76 or 75, I forget.
I think he's older than that.
Yeah, he's 75, I think.
Yeah.
76, yeah, whatever.
Yeah. I don't know if we'll have time, but you should tell him the story about when he first sent you his tune.
Yeah.
That's a funny story. I don't know if you want to tell that, but you don't have to.
All right.
Anyway, yeah, never mind.
Okay.
Go, Corey, go.
Yeah, we've got 2 questions left. John
Okay.
Newman, if you want to go ahead.
Yes. So specifically related to video game music.
Wait, I want to live where you live. What is that?
It is a fake background. I don't.
Oh. Okay.
So I know it's a lot of transition between like pre-scripted scenes and like stuff that's just looping, where the player can choose like how long they're in that area. So what are some good? This is probably really technical, but what are some ways that you can like transition from those like looping soundtracks to like stuff that's scripted?
Yeah. So I started doing this, 20 years ago on Halo 1, where I knew, because we used, for those of you who know what I'm talking about, our cinematic or scripted moments were done in engine, which means that they weren't produced outside the game and then just slapped on. They used the same game engine and characters. We just scripted the characters to do what we wanted to do. But let's say at the end of some encounter, there would be a scripted moment where Master Chief and Cortana or whatever would be doing something. I knew precisely what the trigger was that was going to make that thing happen. And then from that point on, I knew that ending thing would be like scoring a movie. Mm-hmm. Because I knew it would start here, this thing would happen at 10 seconds, this thing would happen at 13, whatever, and all the way down the line. So I knew I could score that whole thing, but I knew leading into it, if I wanted music that led into it, I needed to dovetail whatever the looping things were. So I would design those pieces. So the piece that was scored had something at the beginning of it that would allow something that had some variability to it connect to it, if that makes sense. So whether it's some sort of, and then I would be able to have whatever was happening in the adaptive stuff, let's say the loop, what we'd call the looping stuff. If I knew this event happens, which starts this cinematic moment, then this piece here would get us some sort of a stop. And it could be just as simple as a crossfade. One of these things would just it would fade out while this thing fades in. But it also could be something that locks together musically. So it would wait for the nearest beat or the nearest, measure point or some other sort of marker in the music, so that like whatever was happening when the event happened, these things would come together. This would have a natural out. So if it was in the middle of something longer, then it would go deeper into this piece. If it was already coming close to the ending, it would end earlier in this piece. So this piece had to be able to support itself regardless of where the other piece went into it. And once again, I didn't want people to listen to that and know what was happening. For you, you're playing it and it went like this. So you feel like that's the way it's supposed to go. Somebody else, it goes like this. Somebody else, it goes like that. And everybody has a nice equal experience, hopefully. So yes, that's a great question. And technically there are ways of handling all of that. And the software, especially now with a third-party engine like Wise, you can deal with all that stuff. Now you need
like
callbacks.
Ether and stuff like that.
Yes, you could put markers in the key.
That's just super cool that stuff like that exists now.
Yeah. So I mean, it's basically, if you think about it, it's just like it's like first ending, second ending, third ending coda. I mean, it's just like depending on where you are, you choose which one to go to and make sure that it blends with the other thing. That's really fun when it comes together and it works and it feels seamless. To me, seamlessness is key to this whole thing. You just don't want people to be aware of what you're doing behind the scenes. You want it to feel natural.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
I thought that was great, Marty. I think it's useful for this little exercise that they're on too. Thank you for that. Any more?
Sure.
Yeah, we have one more, and this one's from Marcus.
Hi, this one's just a bit of a nerd question for me, just because I love the Halo 2 theme. I was just wondering how you got that idea for it, considering it starts with the chant, but then it just goes in this epic guitar solo, and just, that whole process.
Well, okay, so first of all, the music itself was written in '99, and that started with the chant going into basically epic cellos and orchestra. Da, 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 and the monks, of which I'm one of the monks, by the way. So we already had that piece was in Halo 1, but for Halo 2, we had made enough of a splash, culturally, that we had Nile Rodgers, who's a music producer, come to me and say, hey, I can get you anybody you want. I can get you Jeff Beck. I can get you Steve Vai. And I'm like, my mind is blown. I'm like, yeah, I'll take anybody. Are you kidding? That sounds great. So once again, that was not my idea. I wasn't thinking I'm going to go into epic, screaming guitar in that piece. Nile Rodgers said, hey, if I get you Steve Vai, can you use him? I'm like, well, of course. I will figure out a way to use Steve Vai. So the Steve Vai came into Seattle. Nile called me, said, book a studio. I brought a bunch of tracks down. And basically, you can see this on my YouTube channel. I recorded that session, and it's not recorded well in terms of the video, but it's fun to watch for all you musicians. You should watch this video. So one thing I know about good musicians is they can improvise and make something great over anything. So I started playing that Halo music with the chant and with the chugging cellos, and just let Steve go to town. And it just immediately became magic stuff. So one of the things I think as a producer and a composer you have to do every once in a while is just make sure you're paying attention. Make sure you're listening, because you can take credit for stuff you had really nothing to do with creating, but you happen to be around when it was created. And I made the decision like, yeah, that's the lick I'm going to use, and that's the piece, that's the performance I'm going to keep. So I do have some responsibility, but like, you get a great performer and magic will happen, I think.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, this has been great, Marty. I really appreciate it. Appreciate your time a lot. If the students wanted to go listen to something of yours that you're really proud of, is there something specific that you could tell them about?
Well, I mean, there's a suite that I did that Paul, contributed to, McCartney, and it's called Music of the Spheres. It was something I did 5 years ago now. I'm pretty sure you can find it online. So yeah, Music of the Spheres, I'm pretty happy with. It's a suite that I wrote to be listened to and performed sort of standalone from the game. All that music ended up being in Destiny, if anybody's played Destiny, so you'll recognize a lot of it, but it was really intended to be something that could hopefully sort of stand on its own. And I think there's some really good stuff in there. And then if you're curious about my process, you can go to my YouTube channel, and there's a bunch of videos up there that go all the way back to the inception point of some piece that I did. And it just shows me, it's just text on a screen that reflect my thoughts while I'm listening back to some of my early piano meanderings. And the reason I'm sharing that, especially for me to share that with young composers, is that I want to encourage people that like everything starts someplace, and the beginnings are not necessarily spectacular. Some things can be really lame, and you have to be able to recognize, that everything starts sort of small and like just a little spark of an idea that if you treat it well, you might be able to get a bonfire out of it. But don't start self-criticizing and getting rid of your early ideas just because you don't think they're spectacular. Really lame things sometimes can turn into something good. And every once in a while, you just keep working at something and it's not good, so you should move on. But that's why I share that stuff. So that's on my YouTube channel.
Professor, if we have time, we got one more question in, if that's all right with you. Sure, and I'll ask this one for him. How do you deal with criticism and feedback, both positive and negative, and what degree does it influence your creativity?
Yeah, well, I only listen to the compliments, and everything else just goes away completely. All right, seriously, it's you have to have a certain amount of tough skin, and then you have to have enough self-awareness. And but trust me, I think sometimes your toughest critic is going to be your own internal voice. And that's the person, sometimes your internal voice, you have to like slap around a little bit, like stop screwing with my creativity. Especially the more education you get, I think the more you can get too self-conscious and think, oh, this has been done before, and this is too simple, or this is too complex. I mean, you could have all sorts of criticisms of yourself while you're doing stuff, which is why I say at the point of creation, try to just give yourself like a playground, pretend you're in a sandbox and you're just having a good time, and then analyze what you're doing later. That's what I think is the important way to go. When it comes to criticism, it's tough because you're going to get, like I had people who within Bungie and within Microsoft, especially like the marketing teams at Microsoft, my idea for the Halo 3 announced was this, piano thing. How does it go? So if anybody recognizes that, that was something that I did for Halo 3, and I had that, and it was in the thing, and it was this, and the marketing team watched this thing and heard that music, and they just started laughing. And I thought, oh man, I didn't expect them to laugh. So I had to, at that moment, I had to say, are my instincts good or are their instincts good? And at that point, I just decided, you know what, I gotta stay with my instincts and see what happens. And a lot of people are happy that I did that. So, but sometimes people will tell you things like, like that example of, hey, that just didn't make me feel the way I thought I wanted to feel. And you have to listen to that. Yeah, criticism after the fact, you sort of have to let it roll off in both directions. People can overstate how great something is and then, or else, overstate how bad it is. So you just move on to the next thing.
Well, thank you, Marty. We really appreciate
Yeah.
it. Hey, everybody, let's unplug our mutes and applaud Marty O'Donnell. Here we go. Yay. That's funny.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Yeah,
Folks.
we really appreciate it. I'll talk to you. But thanks for hanging around. If
Sure.
the rest of all the students, if you could hang on for just a second, but Marty, I know you're busy, guys, so thank
I
you.
will leave. All right. See you all. I'm leaving now. So I'm not sure I know how to leave.
Lower right corner.
Leave meeting. That's what it says right there. Okay.
It's
Thanks, everybody. See you. It's technical. I
It's
know.
technology.
Thanks.
Yeah, technology. Sorry, Steve.
Okay.
Yeah, I get it. Okay, so Chris, did you want to tell them where we are in terms of due dates and what they should be doing right now and stuff?
Yeah, so the due date for the recording is this Friday, April 10th, I believe that's correct. Let me check the date. Yeah, so it's this Friday. So just follow all the instructions that are in the assignment page. For starters, you want to make sure that you're submitting just a recording of yourself without the drone or a metronome click track with it. But otherwise, it can be sort of whatever. And like Mr. O'Donnell was talking about today, really listen back when you record, listen to what you sound like, and experiment. Not everyone's going to have a nice mic, and we understand that. But you probably want to experiment with, if possible, the room you're in, the placement of the mic relative to where you are, where you point the instrument, and sort of experiment with the recording process as to how certain things change what you sound like, and try to submit the best possible sound you can.
I wanted to, it's hard to get feedback as to how this is going since we're doing something that's very different and very unique. And I really would like to hear from a few people right now about, first of all, I guess this process of these guests that we've had come on. If there are things you'd like me to be asking them, if you're getting anything out of it, I'd love some feedback. Anybody?
I thought it was awesome having you on. I thought it was really helpful.
Are there things that you wish I would ask these people that aren't being asked, or anything that would be helpful to anybody compared to how it's going?
I think a lot of people could use like tips from these people on specifically like within the recording softwares, like how to do very like simple things that these people might just know off the top of their head. Because like a lot of people might not even know how to like put an audio file from like their computer into Audacity. Like that might be something to help a lot of people. It's just very simple things.
Thanks for that, Chase. Chris, is that in the tutorial, that sort of thing? I haven't looked at the tutorials, I have to say.
Yeah, the tutorials include the tutorials on how to do this exact thing, which is recording the 15-second segment. So on the tutorial video, if you guys have watched it, I walk through doing the exact task that you have to do. I don't talk about any effects or anything like that. Simply just recording yourself with the drone and setting up a click track is on the tutorial.
Great, thank you. Other input, anybody? Okay.
I think it's been great.
Go ahead.
It's a lot of fun.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. I'm glad. I'm glad. I've been super gratified that everybody's just into it. All these guests are into it. Everybody wants to help right now. That's a cool thing about the mess that we're in, right? It is the human spirits coming through. It's been awesome. So Thursday, we're going to visit with our own Huck Hodge. You know the story again, familiarity breeds contempt. Huck is a superstar in the classical music world. And if you haven't, and I will send it to you again in the announcements thing on Canvas, make sure you read his bio. And most importantly, if you look at the the one video of the piece that he wrote for us for the wind ensemble. He comes from a very different environment, obviously, than Marty, and in a certain way, Marty kind of rails against the composition establishment. Huck came out of that, but Huck, even though his music is not Halo music, it's not pop music by any means, it's very definitely academic music. There are things going for him in his music that a lot of contemporary composers don't have. He knows when to use tonality at just the right time, just, the dissonant kind of filters out. He knows how to incorporate the use of memory in music, which I think is very, very important, sort of the cohesion of an architecture of a piece of music. And he's just a good guy. And you're going to get to see that. I think you'll really enjoy talking to him. He's brilliant, a really brilliant guy. And yeah, sorry about the tomfoolery with Marty. We both agreed that we would try to keep it down. That was about 10% of normal. So thanks for putting up with us.